everyone, my name's Sarah and this is my channel, So Sarah Sewed. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing everything I made in the months of November and December. I'm a little bit behind on these kinds of videos. I've had a really busy summer. I've moved house recently, just last week, and that was a really huge job. But now I'm settled into my new place, I'm hopefully going to be getting back into the routine of posting my plans and my makes videos each month. But I do need to catch up on November and December, so that's what I'll do today. The dress I'm wearing today is one of my makes from December, so I'll talk about that later. But first I'll talk about my November makes. The first thing I made in November was a pair of Arthur pants by Sew Liberated. I made some of these earlier in the year, in the winter, in a linen, and although I really liked them, I didn't get a lot of wear out of them, and I think it was a combination of the fabric choice, the linen, the colour I chose, which was like an eggplant purple, and the length, which was a little bit too short to go with boots for the winter months. So I decided to make a black pair in a wool. Now, in November, I would have thought that these wouldn't have got so much wear because we're heading into the summer, but actually we had such a cold start to summer. I wore these heaps. They are so comfortable. I'm so happy I made them. So as I mentioned before, I had made them earlier in the year in the linen, and this time I made them almost exactly the same. So while I'm measuring about a size 14 in the size guide, I made a size 10 because these are very voluminous pants and they have an elasticized waistband. Now there are two views with the Arthur pants. You can choose to do the whole waistband elasticized, or you can have a zip in the front, and that's the version I made. So I put the fly front and then elasticized waistband, but I did size down to a size 10. The only difference I made when I made these compared to my first pair was I didn't shorten them by as much. So I did still shorten them. I shortened them by about 2.5 inches, whereas I think my first one I'd shortened by about 3 3/4 inches, and they were just slightly too short. Having said that, they've been excellent through the summer. I love wearing them. They're really good with a pair of sandals or thongs and a perfect length. So I've been really enjoying them in the summer, but I thought for a pair of work pants, and especially one that I'd like to wear through the winter, I wanted them just that little bit longer. I bought this wool a couple of years ago, pretty early on in my sewing journey, and I'd been a little bit nervous to use it, but actually it was very easy to use. Probably the hardest thing about it was trying to press it. I don't have a clapper. It's something I think I should invest in because it was really hard to press the wool. But apart from that, it was really nice to work with and it's beautiful to wear. In my first pair of Arthur pants, I struggled a little bit with the instructions for how to do the zipper. It was the very first time I'd tried to put a zip into some pants. And I was a little bit nervous about making them again, but actually the second time I made them, I found it very clear. I'm not sure why I was so confused the first time round, and I found these came together really nicely. There is one issue with the pants, but I decided hopefully no one else will really notice unless they're looking really carefully, and that is where I've positioned the patch pockets on the back of the pants. They are completely not in line at all, and I noticed as soon as I'd done it, but I was just lazy and didn't want to unpick it and do it again. And I was hoping once all the pants were gathered and on the body, you wouldn't notice so much. And you definitely can notice it if you're looking carefully, but I don't think most people are looking that carefully. So I've just left it and I don't really care. So as I said, we had a really cold lead up to the summer and start of summer. And so I wore these so often, at least a few times a week to work. They work really well with ankle boots and also just with some flat slides. I think because they're such a voluminous pant, I try and keep whatever I'm wearing on top more form fitting, perhaps cropped, just to balance out the silhouette a little bit. But I'm looking forward to getting more wear out of them this year as the weather becomes cooler again. I made another black item in November, and that was a t-shirt. It's a t-shirt I've made a few times before. It's the Galaxy Tee by Pattern Scissors Cloth, and it's a free pattern. I love this t-shirt. It's a really perfect one for work for me because it's a little bit of an elevated t-shirt. It's quite high necked. And then it has puffed sleeves, which then come together into a cuff. The ones I've made in the past have been 2 in cotton elastane and then 1 in bamboo. This one I made in a 100% linen knit that I got from My Design, and it works beautifully for this pattern. It's a bit creased, so I apologize for that. But you can see the drape that linen creates, and I'll put some pictures up of me wearing it as well. But a very, very comfortable t-shirt, and one that I've worn quite a bit with my Arthur pants. So that's a really comfortable make, and I know I'll get a lot of wear out of it. You might know that I am a music teacher and I do a lot of conducting at school. And whenever I'm conducting a show or whatever, I would be expected to wear black. So this will come in handy when I'm conducting the musical in a couple of months' time. The other thing I made in November was a knitted project, and this was another free pattern, this time the Sockhead Cowl by Kelly McCure from Boho Knits. I decided to knit this one up for my children's guitar teacher. I think that individual music teacher relationship with a student is such a strong and important one, and I love to create something handmade for the guitar teacher each year. So this year it was this cowl. I made myself a So Faded sweater earlier in the year, and that sweater used I decided to use 5 yarns for that, but I used yarns that I got in a set, and that set had 6 colours in the fade, and I didn't use the very darkest one in my sweater, so I had 1 skein left. It was a 100-gram skein of wool that I had left. And I decided that this would work really well for this cowl, because this cowl is just a 1 skein project, and having a sort of a variegated yarn keeps it interesting. So I used it for this. It's a really, really simple knit. It's basically ribbing, then knit, then ribbing again. I accidentally forgot to weigh the skein before I started it. So my top ribbing section and bottom ribbing section aren't exactly the same, but hopefully that doesn't really matter. The teacher seemed to really like it. It was quite funny. I gave it to her in the middle of December, when you would expect it would not be, appropriate weather for wearing a cowl at all. But as it happened, the weather was freezing, and she very well might have got use out of it the very next day. So, but she seemed to like it, and I enjoyed knitting it. Moving on to December, when my focus was on the Vali Top and Dress by Pattern Fantastique. Now I'm wearing one of those today, but the first time I made it, I decided to make the top version and just try and figure out the tricky bits in the pattern, because I had read that it can be a little bit tricky. And I used a fabric by the Scenic Route Studio that I bought from Nerida Hansen in a mid-weight cotton. The designer describes the pattern as like a glam smock kind of style. It's got, and as you can see here, it's got this kind of fitted yoke section at the top, big sleeves, and then from here it just drops all the way down. So I made this top version first, as I mentioned, in this fabric. This one is a mid-weight cotton, so it was quite stiff, really easy to work with because it wasn't shifty at all, and pressed really easily, and I think it was a great choice for making this kind of wearable toile. I did have to do quite a few sections again, mainly because I just made mistakes with the seam allowance. So I would recommend really making sure you read the instructions really carefully if you are making this, just to check, because the seam allowance changes a little bit throughout the pattern. The other thing I found really, really hard was making these ties. I tried so many times to turn them. In the end, I ended up just making them like I would make a binding. So I've just folded it over, and then so you can't tell, I don't think. So I think that's perfectly fine, and it's definitely the way I'm going to make any skinny tubes or ties in future, because it just took the stress out. The only tricky thing was sort of figuring out how to neatly make the ends. So they're not the neatest ends in the world, but actually another project that I made after this one had a really good technique, which I'll now put into place in the future. So I'll talk about that soon. But here is the top version. Now, the other thing that I didn't understand properly on the pattern was I was supposed to sew this front section together. So mine's a little bit open and a little bit lower than the pattern intends. So I don't know if I can go back and hand sew that together just to give it that little bit more closure and a little bit more modesty. It's not super duper low, but it might just make that tiny bit of difference there. And I'll put some pictures up of me wearing it. I wore it the day after I finished it, and I got a colleague to take some photos of me at school. So I'll put some of those in now. I made the elastic around the arms pretty small so that I could get that really full sleeve look by rolling them nice and high. I decided in my next versions to not make it quite so tight because it is a little bit too tight. But a really fun top. I really like it. I made a size 14 in this one because because this section is the fitted section, it's important that that you carefully check your upper bust measurement. I probably could have sized down, but I think it's a good fit. It feels pretty good, and I wouldn't have wanted it to be tight. So I'm happy with the way this one fits. So I may as well talk about this one next. Once I had made the top, I had the confidence to go on and make the dress. Now, this fabric I had on back order. This is again from Nerida Hansen, and the designer is Miss Moresby, and it is in the Tencel linen blend, which is, I think it's 93% Tencel, 93% Tencel, 7% linen. And I'd never used that before or felt it or anything like that. So I was curious to see what it would be like. It's beautiful. It's got such a nice drape. It was really easy to sew with. It's completely opaque and it's got a really nice drape. So I love it. I just love this fabric so much, and I wanted to make sure I did it justice. So I was really glad I'd made that toile of the Vali top, and then I went and made this and I wore it on Christmas Day. So this one, the only difference or improvement I made was I did actually understand to sew this section together. And I also followed the instructions. There are a couple of variations in whether you do the hem before you do the side seams or you do the side seams before the hem. This one I followed the sort of original instructions, which is to do the hem before you then do the side seams. This version, I followed everything pretty much to all of the notches and all the marks in the pattern, and I find the pockets the pocket opening a bit small. The actual size of the pockets is fine, but it's the pocket opening to get my hand in. It's quite tight. And you can see the pocket starts here, but it's closed all the way up to here. So it's, yeah, it is a big pocket, but it's hard to get my hand into. So that's something to be aware of. You might not want to make the pocket closure as small as they tell you to in the pattern. But that's the only change I would make. And in fact, I did make another one of these in January, and that was the only change I did make, but I'll talk about that in the January video. Oh, the other change I made was that I put just a little bit more elastic in the sleeve. So you can have it down, relaxed down, or if you want that sort of more dramatic look, you can sort of push the elastic up. Personally, I found that the elastic guide that they gave, I think it was 12 inches for my size. Whatever the elastic guide was, I reduced it by 1 inch. And that seems to work really nicely. I'm happy with that. The other items I made in December were all gifts for other people. 2 of them for my nieces and 1 of them for my mum. So I'll start with the baby clothes. The first thing I made was a top for my niece in leftover fabric from this Vali top. I decided to make the Banksia Dress by Peony Patterns, but I made the top version. So this pattern comes with a few different variations. It has 2 different length skirts, I think, or you can do a short one and make it a top. You can have ruffles on the shoulder straps, or you can leave them off. I just love those ruffles though, and that was definitely one of the things that drew me to this pattern. So this pattern has a cute little yoke and then straps that cross over and then tie up at the back. The back has a little elastic section as well to help get it over the child's head. I think this pattern comes in sizes 1 to 14, so a pretty big size range. I made the size 2. My niece is about 2.5, but she's quite small. And this size fit her really well. Also with that sort of adjustability with the elastic and the adjustables and the straps that you tie, I knew that there would be a little bit of give in the pattern as well. These instructions were excellent. I loved making this pattern. They were so clear. Every single step was clearly shown with a photo and really clear instructions. I found this one really enjoyable to sew. I especially enjoyed finding like a matching lining that would complement the fabric, and I think that looks really sweet. And as I mentioned before, this top has the straps that go over your shoulders. They're quite small tubes, but rather than turning tubes, which I just struggle with so much, these are made in that kind of binding way where you fold it over and then you sew it together that way. But this had a really great technique explained of how you first close one of the ends before you do that. So that came out with a really, really neat finish. And then I've just stolen that technique for the ends of this one, which is hard to show you close up, but trust me, they're a little bit neater than the first one. And then for my subsequent one that I made in January as well. And it just took the stress out of the process. And look, they're so skinny. No one would ever know that if they're turned tubes or if you'd sewn them down. So highly recommend that technique for any small straps. The other great thing about peony patterns is a lot of their dresses also come with matching dolly versions. So I managed to get the Banksia dress and Banksia dolly dress patterns in I think it was for $9.95 Australian or something. I remember it was on sale and it was really good value. So I made her doll a version as well. There are 3 sizes including in the doll version, and I just went with the middle one and hoped that it would fit something that she had. And luckily for me, it fit her little doll perfectly. And I'll put a picture in here of them matching together. Basically the exact same construction for the small one as for the child version, but you're just working with smaller pieces. Came together really quickly, and I love the way they look, and I think that my niece does too, and so do her parents. So that was a really successful make, and I'll definitely use this pattern again. I think it's gorgeous. I think it can also be layered over the top of a t-shirt if you are looking for more sun protection. But for a nice little evening or inside look, this is a really, really cute pattern. I have another niece. She's 1 year old, and I made her a Christmas present too. I made her a sweater, the Baby Basics Drop Sleeve Sweater by Tote Patterns. This is a pattern I have used in the past. It's again, excellent pattern. It comes with quite a few variations in terms of you can put a hood on, you can do a spliced version, you can add a kangaroo pocket. For this one, I just did the very, very basic version sweater with ribbing at the neckline, at the cuffs, and at the hem. So I used scraps for this project, so it was really nice to use up some of my French terry scraps that I had. I used this fabric to make myself a Billy sweater, I don't know, 18 months ago, and I still had the leftovers. And it's a design by Margaret Jean, these beautiful, I think it's an abstract landscape, and it's got lots of colors in it. When I made mine, I used a ribbing that picked up on the blue in the design, but for my niece, I went with a soft pink, and I think this looks beautiful. The ribbing I just got from Spotlight, and I think they work really well together. I don't have a picture of my niece wearing it yet. She probably hasn't had the chance to. It's been quite warm since summer, even though it was so cold leading up to it. But I'll put some pictures in of the completed garment, and I put a little label in there from Kylie and the Machine. The Baby Basics drop sleeve sweater, the version I have, is in sizes 50 to 3, so premature baby to 3 years old, but it also comes in a kids version and then adult versions as well, women's and men's. So you could make one for the whole family if you liked. I've only tried the little babies version, but I think the rest of them all look very similar in their style and probably in their construction as well. The last thing I made in December was a project bag for my mum. My mum is an avid knitter. She always has several projects on the go, so I thought she could use a project bag so that she can put a project in that to keep herself organized. So I saw this idea on the Fold line. They had a video on gift ideas that you can make, and I loved this idea. They featured a different a different project bag pattern, but by the same designer, and that designer is Lasenby .co, Lasenby Patterns, and they had a few different designs to choose from, but I chose this small little drawstring bag. It came in 2 different sizes, and I made my mum the small one, which supposedly holds 2 large skeins of wool and a project on top. I think it would fit a little bit more than that. It's quite roomy. I had fun once again choosing fabrics from my scraps to make this one. At least the outer was from scraps, and then I chose a lining to match. It has pockets on the inside. Now the template, you can choose how big or small or far apart you want to create your pockets, and then it closes with a drawstring pull to keep everything inside. When you have it open, you can fold over the top and make it look more like a sort of little basket. And my mum really likes it, and she put in a new project straight away. I'll try and get some footage of that, but otherwise I have got some pictures of when I'd finished it before I gave it to her, and you can have a look at that. So I think this is a really great pattern. I wouldn't mind trying the bigger one as well at some point. I would definitely recommend this one. In terms of the instructions, sometimes I found the instructions a little bit wordier than they needed to be, but apart from that, I really enjoyed making this bag. So that is everything I made in the months of November and December. I'm really pleased at the things that I made for myself. I've been already getting so much wear out of, and I love, and that the gifts were so well received as well. So a highly successful couple of months of sewing, and I'm really enjoying being back into it. So thank you very much for watching today, and I'll look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye bye.